First Street. I don't know.
Is that showing live on the site?
But somebody was like out.
There we are.
All right, good evening. This is our December 12th Town Council meeting. Sorry for the delay there. We had some technical difficulties. We're getting started. Before tonight's regular meeting, we have a work session. And that's Basalt Forward 2030 update, affordable housing. Michelle, I believe you're up, and the Bach members are online, and Dennis as well. So
Yeah.
turn it over to you, Michelle.
Great, thank you. Well, good evening, council and Bach members who are able to attend. I see we have, in person, we have Jay Israel. Online, we have Ann Baker and Dave Portman, and we may also have Katie Erickson. She's in the traveling mode and is going to try to log on as well. But as you know, you have largely a new Bach group, so I think it's great to have them here virtually and in person to kind of hear your words and to get their feedback as well. This work session marks a notch of progress toward the Basalt Forward 2030 strategic plan to create more affordable housing. Building a significant affordable housing project, in those words, was identified as the top priority for projects in the Basalt Master Plan. And the number 10 goal in the 2020 Master Plan was to support a public-private partnership to build affordable housing. So we're really kind of hitting a bunch of those things in this conversation, which is exciting. So on our next slide, and this is a presentation that Bach was presented at one of their recent meetings. So you're getting to hear what they have heard. In this presentation, we'll focus on the currently owned town properties, which include Stotts Mill, Willits Parcel 2E, and the Willits Rugby Field adjacent lot. Trying to steer away from calling all of these by their parcel numbers because it's confusing. And I'll go through talking about the opportunities, constraints, and recommended next steps for each project. And then just as kind of a reminder, we have currently $5.2 million available in our affordable housing bond monies from that $6 million bond initiative. And just for the record, that other $800,000 was spent to purchase these 4 Stotts Mill lots. So that's where that money is more or less gone. So we'll start with the next slide. The 4 lots on Stotts Mill. These lots were purchased for single-family housing for town staff as a means for retention and recruiting staff members. The town does currently have access to rental units for staff members, but in the event we were to need to recruit, for instance, a department head like he's not retiring, I just like to use him because he's in the room, a new police chief when he retires. He's probably not going to be moving into one of the studio apartments that we have for rent. That's going to be a tough sell. So these lots were bought with that view in mind of staff retention and recruiting. We have 4 lots there. 2 are side by side. Well, there are 2 piers and they are side by side. There are design guidelines here that restrict some of the development here, which are simple to work within. There are multiple projects right now not related to us that are under construction that are prefab units on the site, so we'd like to propose moving forward with prefab units here for economic reasons and for the speed of delivery. Right now, these are all ballpark figures, gross rough estimates, but we think we could have 2 prefabricated homes designed, built, and delivered, moved into in 2024 for 1.5 or potentially a lot less, but I like to give you the most conservative number that we're looking at. We're not recommending going forward with all 4 at this time because we feel like out of the only having $5.2 million, we want to hold some money in reserve so that we have funds to match for grant applications. all of the grant applications through the state generally have matching requirements of some amount. So want to kind of keep some cash to the side for that purpose to go forward. So we'll come back with a timeline for all of the projects at the end of this discussion so you can compare where we are with each property. But this one's pretty simple because there's really nothing else that can be built on the site. There's no discussion about it. The size is the size. We're looking at 2,000 or smaller square foot homes. It's pretty regulated. And if we could get stick-built numbers for the same amount or less, we would go that route, but we're very unlikely that that's going to happen. So that's the Sots Mill. The next property is Willits Parcel 2E, which sometimes is described as the daycare lot in Willits. It's across Lewis Lane from Takaw. There have been conversations for a couple of years about Blue Lake Preschool developing a child care center on this property. And as we know, the costs of developing such a center have been really prohibitive for that building to go forward in any productive fashion. They are looking at revising their footprint and making a smaller child care center there. To help move that project forward, I've had conversations with Eagle County, who's interested in participating on the project, more in the housing aspect to help that go forward than the child care. Although, of course, they're supportive of child care, but they have money for housing and not child care at this time. You know, there have been some very basic site plans done here by the child care center, so we don't really know what the number of units here could be, but I think anywhere, you know, guessing 6 to 12 could be significantly more on what we're willing to kind of go to bat for here. Since this is in an existing neighborhood, there's some discussion about that. We have, based on, and there's also the wetlands in between this property and the neighboring existing adjacent residential units. So what we've done is applied for the planning and infrastructure grant through DOLA. We'll hear about that in March. And those would be funds to help us site plan, do some architectural design, some engineering work, and determine what could be built on the property. Eagle County has committed to helping us with our matching requirements for that grant, which is only 10 grand. And so that's helpful. Any development on that property will need to go through a land use approval process. So we're recommending that we go forward and pursue the design and development so we can start that land use approval process and then go to construction in 2025. Because those are all lots of things that will occur. I have on here in italics applying for the More Housing Now Tier 2 grant. And the reason it's kind of in italics there is that this is a small amount grant, and frankly, if we're only going to get $1 million, we may not want to be stuck in that commitment for that small of a grant on what's probably going to be more like a 15 or larger $1 million project. So financing to be figured out, which I'll continue to talk about as we go forward here. And then our last project is, our last property that we're talking about is the rugby field, adjacent lot on Valley Road here. This is a smaller than the 2E property. It's about half an acre. And around 2017, site analysis was conducted on the site. And the maximum number of units from that site analysis was 12 units. You know, 2017 to 2024, or maybe even 25, there may be an appetite to have a little bit more density there, something to be studied. This property would also need to go through a land use approval process that would go in front of BOC and P&Z and council, just like the other property. So pursuing some site design here and going forward would be the next steps for this property. Again, funding needs to be secured to actually construct it. And one important part here is that all of the state grants right now that are in the pipeline really want shovel-ready projects. So it's a little bit tricky in that we're not able to confirm when one of these would be built based on funding. We kind of have to go through the process and say we have a project ready because we're competing with other affordable housing developments throughout the state. And the state wants to prioritize giving money to things that are ready to go. So there's going to be some investment needed to get these things going forward now. And this is not unsimilar to what happens in the private world where they go through design development, they go through the land use process, their project changes maybe from what was conceived to what eventually gets approved, and then based on that, financing is granted. Being the small group municipality that we are and only having 5.2 in our pocket, it's not really that we have many other options but to pursue that route forward. And frankly, it's a low risk. So if we don't develop one of these for a couple of years, we're at no risk because we have plans that are ready to be built when we have the funding.
Michelle, does that site plan reflect 6 units or 12?
12.
Okay, so there'd be stacked flats on those?
Yeah, this particular plan is mostly townhomes with a couple of stack flats in there to get to 12. It has tuck-under parking. I obviously wasn't here when this site plan was done, but I think that it was at its best to try to mirror what is happening at Lakeside a little bit. And whether we think that that's the best use going forward or not would be something we could look at going on.
Would that just be a standalone, fresh, original design, or would it try to pick up materials and sort of blend in with the lakefront townhomes, or what's the to be determined, I guess?
Yeah, we could certainly go down that route. One of the things for any of these projects is being creative with the funding. In the way that relates to design is that what could happen here is this could be a modular construction. You do multiple levels of modular construction these days. And being able to table in with another run of modular construction, for instance, the Roaring Fork Fire District is going to be doing an affordable housing project on their Elder Bell property. And it's our understanding that's going to be modular construction for affordable housing. We seem to be we potentially could be on a similar timeline and join their run. And by being in their run of boxes, we could share designs and modify what we wanted the outside to look like, but be part of the bulk pricing of getting the boxes created all at the same time, if that makes sense. But we could certainly go through, and I'm sure that the design from the exterior would be a hot topic of conversation through the land use approval process. Yeah.
Since we own the land on this one, could we do just an RFP or an RFP for like a tax? One of those like third parties that comes in, builds the stuff.
Right.
Runs it for the tax write-off?
Yeah, I had hoped that any or all of these projects could be combined to figure out how to do a low-income housing tax credit project. Unfortunately, the threshold number for any of those tax credit project developers to be interested is 30 units, and we're not going to get there. I mean, if we do, it'll be by the hair on our chinny chin chin, and I don't think that we can bank on that being a financing.
We could do it, we'd probably exceed the height limitation.
Yeah.
Well, and then, of course, there's like AMI limits that come with that as well, that may not be appropriate to the Basalt demographics.
Right. Yeah, there are a lot of limitations, and I think that's something we're going to be navigating as we look at grant opportunities. Some of the grants have AMI limitations, which will be, I'll be bringing back to you to say, is this something that we want to have on this property, or do we want to have the flexibility? There's certainly a lot of interest from the private sector in having public-private partnerships, figuring out how to go forward there. And that comes with a different set of strings, but it could be strings that work better for the town. It could be more complicated. Those are things we need to kind of work through a little bit.
Habitat has expressed an interest in doing this project, so put the land under them, they do the vertical construction, and then, so, that's a potential partner.
Yeah, absolutely.
They wouldn't mind the smaller scale as much as a private developer.
Yeah, you know, they're all keen for this form of development because they're underway, they're building a modular housing plant in Rifle, so, you know, they're, you know, hunting sort of big game now, they're talking about, you know, they interviewed for the lumberyard project in Aspen. So, whoops, does this have to be? Yeah, thank you. So you know, I'm not gonna pitch them, but I mean, that's what their emphasis would be precisely, you know, their wheelhouse, I guess.
Yeah.
So we go to the next slide, is just kind of a walkthrough of what you know, that we have 5.2 available in funds, and that really, just like any of our capital projects, the bond money is money for leveraging other financing. The state has multiple grant programs, including the Prop 123 program, that are in the pipeline, and the details are not out yet. So anxiously waiting for those to come out so we can, you know, make some plans on which route we're going and what the restrictions are going to be or not. And that will also help us understand how aggressively or not we need to pursue public-private partnerships and what makes the most sense for each project. Both Eagle County and Picken County are interested on some level, and we're working through to define what that means in partnering with us on some level of affordable housing projects as well. So the next steps are really to consider the priorities for these sites and going through the site planning, the land use applications, and then while those two activities are going on somewhat of a parallel schedule, we'll be applying for grants and figuring out the funding mechanisms for the projects as we move forward. With exception to the Stotts Mill lots, that we don't see that there would be any construction happening in 2024, but hopefully we could shoot for an early start in 25 on at least one of the Willits properties. So on our last slide, which is really hard to read, sorry about that. Thanks to James. It's just a draft schedule, and here is where I had this discussion with Bach, and actually we also presented this update to P&Z, since these applications will come to them at some point in time. But it shows a schedule for parcel 2E for the daycare. We've submitted for the grant for the planning and the infrastructure, hopefully learning about the award in March. And then at that point, going out for an RFP for consulting services to design that site. And that puts us in a June start for actual site planning and potentially a land use application. That land use application, the site design, will take at minimum 6 months. And then that would put us potentially ready to go out to bid for construction in late, highly unlikely, this is super optimistic, late 2024, but probably 2025, with an RFP for construction in the following spring of 25 for that project. The Willits Rugby adjacent property runs on a much shorter timeline, just because we don't have the grant application in there. The land use application should be similar, but potentially much simpler, because it's a single use, it's more homes. We don't have the discussion about the shared parking, the shared uses, all of those sorts of things. So, however we want to prioritize it, we can figure out how to go forward with that one at a similar time instead of wherever we want to be. And then at the bottom here, I've got the schedule for Stotts Mill, which if you agree with this schedule, we would put out the RFP for design build services from the prefab manufacturers in January, with the hope of going through design during this spring and then getting some boxes to hit the ground sometime this summer, with move-in dates at the end of 2024. So, that's a lot to digest.
I have two quick questions. One, on the rugby field, is it just counterproductive to not, I don't know if that's me or not, to not put out an RFP for a public-private partnership, just to test the waters, since we own the land? Obviously, we can't push the other $4 million and all into that. And then on parcel 2E, I know it's dedicated for childcare. You know, I've talked to a lot of parents. We've had a lot of meetings throughout my time here on youth zone style after-school program for elementary, middle school, high school. Demand for the rec center continues to kind of be batted around. I know we don't have a lot of land left. Is there any, you know, I know childcare is really important, but so is there's lots of different things. Is there a possibility of looking at a rec center there with a childcare component, with, you know, try to check more boxes than just childcare? I don't know, just throwing that out there for.
Yeah, I guess I don't understand what the programming is for parcel 2E beyond the daycare center.
That's all it is. That's all it's been in the PUD.
Okay, so what does that have to do with affordable housing? Did I lose the plot?
No, we had originally talked in meetings before when you started that they were looking at some affordable housing with the childcare facility. It's a little harder play in the childcare space because there are more restrictions. I think they are getting some units in the Stotts Mill one, but it's just, that's why it's in there, because there was talk of some type of housing
Just a question. I mean,
adjacent to it.
should a multi-level building be explored with childcare on the ground floor and residential units
Got
above?
it. Okay.
So,
And that's what it's destined for, and one of the last properties we own, so.
And I think it's possible too that you could have this housing, kind of take that sort of cascade of options for end user, but start with childcare workers, as a first, and then kind of go to the next step if nobody fills those spots. So you could, you know, have that complement to the childcare.
Yeah, I think that, isn't that what, what's it called, the Little Red Schoolhouse in Snowmass? Isn't that what they're looking at doing? Not necessarily on the floors, but they were looking at having some affordable housing adjacent for.
That might be right. And I think this one is open, just not knowing exactly, you know, we don't have a design yet, so that could be potentially an adjacent building, it could potentially be, you know, above, as Ryan mentioned, you know, I think all that'll come out in the wash. But, you know, it's constrained, there's only so many units you'd be able to put on it, but, you know, it seems like that bigger daycare option is not so feasible. It's shrinking down, and, you know, I think as far as a rec center on that property is probably pretty tight, even if you just wanted to do a rec center, because of the, you know, the wetlands. It's not like the whole parcel is available for it, so, so I think there could be some, you know, I think once you get into like rec center, I'd guess the footprint's pretty sizable. I guess it depends on how you program it, but
just thinking outside the box. And
Yeah.
Well, this is a question, is the daycare, childcare facility on that space our imposition on ourselves?
It's in the zoning document, the PUD document, and James could probably talk, it's like public uses, there are some restrictions, like we couldn't put like our public works facility there as an example, but childcare and then
What if
other
it was
civic uses.
Like all housing?
You know, that could be considered through an amendment process to establish kind of the uses on the site. In the past, it's really just kind of been discussed as housing and daycare, you know, affordable housing and daycare.
I guess I would just, my perspective is like, it's hard to get a big one in there, so we're shrinking and shrinking and shrinking it down, but we're still waiting for that element when we could build housing. So it's,
I mean, I think we need to figure out like how much childcare needs there, like answer that question first and see how much is left and what we can do with it, what makes the most sense. I mean, but to kind of preclude any childcare, I mean, that's not what the intent of, you know, the PUD is. The other one, the rugby field seems like lower hanging fruit. Like I'd love to see some, you know, dates and what can we do to get that going from a development planning, site planning perspective sooner. Because it seems like that there's just less dependencies, less to deal with there. And I'd also like to see kind of like what, for all these kind of soft cost stuff, like what are we laying out, you know, over the next year to do all this stuff? I mean, I know it's not anywhere near all of that, but just to kind of understand, and then what's coming back in with interest and all that stuff, just because it seems like this is gonna be a multi-year thing.
I'm in favor of, go ahead.
Oh, sorry, okay. Okay, Michelle, when you went down the path of looking at turning the Stotts Mill daycare space into like a youth center, and then, you know, I heard community members come and say, you know, that space is too small for us to do something like they have in Aspen. Is it a bigger footprint on the parcel 2E? Would it meet those requirements for a sort of after-school space more easily? And do you see that there might be more funding or an easier way to get to where we're building that rather than just shrinking the daycare component until we can afford it on that lot?
Yeah, I think that would be something I'd be happy to do some more research on. You know, and just thinking about the other rec center, youth centers in the valley, I think the Snowmass Rec Center is not a huge footprint. You know, it's basically got the gym and the basketball courts associated with it, and then the Carbondale Rec Center is one footprint. And I would just need to do some research on what the size of those footprints are and what could go on. I don't know why we couldn't have, like, just visually, and for me, thinking of the Carbondale Rec Center, it would be pretty easy to put another level of housing above that. And you don't have the restrictions with the daycare of the proximity and the number of exits and all of the things for the state licensing. So could certainly look into that and look into the grant opportunities to go forward with things like that.
I think we should. I mean, I think after-school care is also childcare. I see that as a very ambitious project to get there with an early childhood center. It seems cost prohibitive. And so I'm just interested to see, you know, could we provide some other after-school care instead?
You know, I could be missing some pieces here, but it seems like the state of play on 2E is that, you know, we've done a feasibility study, we have a cool plan that would cost $12 million to build, and we're gonna hang out and wait for either grants or an enlightened kind of investor that would come in and, you know, put $12 million at risk for the unbelievably rich reward of childcare. So, you know, I think if we're, unless we want to just leave this vacant for the rest of our lives, it behooves us to think pretty creatively about this parcel. I've had a lot of commentary from Takal about not trying to take over the whole parcel, but some artist and residence possibilities. So there's an alchemy here. There are some ingredients like childcare, like, you know, affordable housing, just straight, you know, up for the community, affordable housing. And working with Takal on some creative ideas and kind of think about a different formula. I think you mentioned that. I think you're going to undertake a planning and sort of programming exercise this summer. I think it'd be really pretty good to engage with Blue Lake and just see what a sensibly sized facility is, not, you know, 150 kids and $12 million. That's just not a sensible conclusion. I think there's a mix of stuff out there that could be really fun.
Sounds fun.
And one other thought, and I know it's outside of this, but I would go back to land banking. I mean, we have cash on hand. We're not fighting interest rates. If someone's looking to sell out of the stuff that Ted had presented us, maybe just at least revisit it, just see what's out there, because we're not getting any more land. We can obviously see that, and it's, you know, it allows us to control it going forward and not.
So I was gonna say, of these options, I'm in agreement with David that the rugby adjacent piece seems like low-hanging fruit. I know that I am a broken record about this, but I will say it again so it is on the record. I'm still uncomfortable with the idea of spending such a large chunk of this bond money on the Stotts Mill parcels for 2 units, and then on top of it, saying that they're gonna be employee housing. I don't think that was the intent when the public granted us that money.
Need employee housing for the towns.
For the town,
Yeah.
yeah, specifically for the town. And Ryan, I understand that it's such a great retention piece, but I just want to be conscientious about the fact that this was money that was like, I just don't think that was what the public viewed that they were putting money towards.
Well,
Is-
it's still affordable housing, though.
It
and it's
is.
still-
It
it's-
is.
You have to cover your bases on
And I'm
some
not
stuff.
saying like, don't necessarily build it. I mean, I approved, you know, purchasing the parcels. I still think that was a good decision. I'm just saying, I'm not sure that us paying to build it to house Town of Basalt employees would be how I would go. I have reservations about that.
And I think you know, Michelle and I have talked about this a little bit. You know, there's 2 more lots still, right? And we've had the conversation of, well, do you make these rental? Do you make them ownership? And again, I think council could have the discussion of, you know, do you set aside a few of them for employees and a few of them for general affordable housing? You know, I think casting them off and then the town not having any control over these lots in the long run is in my estimation, a miss, because, you know, I think there will come a time that we're going to be desperate for housing, and then when, you know, where do we then look for that housing for our employees, you know? So I think there's a mix that we can achieve, and I also think, like, we may not have employees that are, you know, able to move into these right now, so then it could go into, you know, the next, you know, whoever would be next in line, whether it be you know, somebody from the school or, you know, another public agency. But what we're seeing out there is, you know, the fire district is taxing themselves to build housing for themselves. The school is taxing to build housing for themselves. You know, the day somebody shows up, or day, you know, and their water doesn't turn on, or an emergency call comes in and the police can't show up, then people realize that we are essential, and I think we do have to just have that recognition, and I don't think they all necessarily need to go to the town employees, but we're gonna have a heck of a time with recruitment in the future.
Well, and I think that there are some mechanisms that could, you know, help to parlay that money into reuses. And so maybe the way that I should couch this is that I would just like to see that money is somehow being cyclical, that like, you know, if, let's say we build it and then we sell it, and then that money goes back into the fund or something like that, like just to put out $1.5 million for a town employee is not a good narrative, that's all.
Sure, no, I can appreciate that. And I think one of the other strategies, and I'll be quiet, but, was, you know, those building permits are starting to get pulled, you know, in Stotts Mill, and so I think part of it too was, you know, let's jump on that now and build on a few of those lots, so we're not the last entity to build and be under construction on 4 lots, however long from now, where the cost of that construction is that much more. And once you have the structures, then you guys can make the policy decision on who might benefit.
Right,
Yeah.
yeah, no, I understand that.
Yeah.
I'm worried about our time. We got 10 to 6, and we got a
David and Ryan both
Meeting's
had
gonna
comments, though.
I'll
David and Ryan both had
Okay,
comments.
go for it.
I'll make it real quick. Yeah, I think we gotta have to remember who ultimately benefits from affordable housing. And sure, the person living there benefits, but it's the community for that, whatever that person provides, whether it's public safety, if it's a police chief, what, you know, somebody who's principal at a school, whatever, right? That's the whole point. So I think whatever the disposition of the place is, as far as, you know, what's the prioritization of who's in there, big picture, I mean, we gotta do this stuff, and we have to think about it in terms of the town as well. And it's all gonna come out in the wash as far as having, you know, the people that we need living in the community and working here.
But I just want to say, there's not going to be anybody to serve if the only people in the community are first responders.
It's a circular.
Yeah.
You're
It's
right.
gonna come out.
Did you say it's 1.5 for 2 units, for 2 homes?
That's what we're assuming is kind of a worst-case scenario. I'd like to say it's gonna be significantly less than that, but I don't wanna overpromise and underdeliver. So I'd rather come back and say, oh, look we found a better number when we went out to bid and we got to this. Yeah. And I think if those 2 units were for sale, we would have that funding come back and potentially out of spending 1.5, get at least 1 back.
But
To
I
put
would
back
want to
in
see
that.
those stay deed restricted.
We have no choice but for them to be.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah,
Impossible.
no, you can't just sell
If
the
they're
free
gonna be
market.
prefabricated units, wouldn't it make sense then to just do all 4 if you get any sort of cost savings?
If the number comes in well,
Agreed, yeah.
I'm worried about having enough money if we're eligible for any grants, there's always a match required. And if I have no funds to share into the match, we're in a really funny pickle, yeah.
Okay.
I just want to say thank you to the Bach members, and I had hoped that we would get to hear from you, and I'm sorry we're out of time.
Should
Yeah,
definitely
This is
do this
really
regularly.
good stuff, and hopefully we do all these projects. Okay, let's grab a quick bite, and we'll be back in here 6 o'clock. Ciao, ciao.
Thanks, Michelle.
Yep.
you want me to do a countdown? Yes, sir. Or are you set to go? Okay, 3, 2, 1. All right, we're on, we're live. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the December 12th meeting of the Basalt Town Council. We have some exciting items up for this evening. So we will start with our call to order and roll call, Pam, please.
Absolutely. Let us begin with David Knight,
Here?
Elise Hoddle,
Present.
Ryan Slack,
Here.
Bill Kane,
Yes, here.
Peter Schindler,
Here.
Angela Anderson,
Here.
and the A-team is present, sir. Thank you.
All righty. Next business is our consent agenda. 2 items. One is the minutes from November 28th, and the second is a continuation of the public hearing and first reading on Resolution 38. Can I get a motion to approve or amend the consent agenda?
Mayor, I move that the town council approve the consent agenda items as presented.
Second.
All right, moved and seconded. All those in favor, aye?
Aye.
Aye, okay. Next point, we now are open to calls from the public. So if anybody in the audience or anybody would like to call in virtually and address the town council about any issue that's not on our agenda, this is the time for you to address town council. So please step up, come on up to the mic, tell us your name and address.
Hello, my name is Morris Hogan. I'm a resident at Twin River Condominiums right across the street here.
Okay,
I'm here today to discuss the new street lamps that were installed on Midland
yeah.
Square.
uh-huh.
Particularly 4 of them on the more eastern side have really illuminated the Twin Rivers building and many of the residents' bedrooms. And I'm just curious if there's possible ways to adjust this, maybe if it's dimming the lights or possible blackout hours from, that they're on all night long. I don't know if they need to be on all night long.
And pretty bright?
Pardon?
Are they real bright?
They're quite bright,
Okay.
especially comparing to
All
what
right.
it used to be there.
Well, that's how we
Usually,
find out.
I can speak to that just briefly. I don't know if they've been dimmed, but I believe they were installed with dimmers, and that same light we've used, over across the street. We've had success with that, so we can check with the installer and just see what could be done.
Yeah, and I did speak with Boyd and Catherine Christoph about dimming it, but I was also curious if it'd be possible to even, there's like 1 or 2 in particular that are curbside to the building that are extremely bright. Maybe if it's possible, those could be shut off.
Yeah, well, we'll
between
work
late
with
night
you and get
hours.
them
Okay.
toned down.
Yeah, great. That's all I have.
Then if the thefts start picking up, we may have to go back.
Yeah, no, I
Just
mean,
kidding, I'm sure there won't be.
It'd be a first
Yeah.
time for that street, I guess, but something
No,
to
I
be
think
heads
so.
up about. So should I
Yeah,
keep it with you guys?
well, appreciate the comment, thanks.
Thank you.
Anyone else like to address council? Item not on the agenda. Anybody calling in? Looks like not.
Oh, here.
Yeah, we have Laura Main online here.
Oh, okay,
for
I
hand
didn't
up.
see her there. Sorry, Laura, go ahead, please.
Laura, if you want to unmute, you can speak to council.
Hi, can you hear me?
We can
Yeah.
hear you.
Okay, great. Laura Main, Timperney Restaurant, 165 Lynn Avenue. I just want to say that, put out a big thank you to Stutzman Gerbaz and to the town for this water line replacement project. It was a big job, and it got done quickly. The guys were really impressive. Obviously, we weren't happy to be closed for this, but realized this is part of necessary infrastructure, and we understand that and took a hit for that night. But going forward, I think it's maybe a little soon to declare a great success for Midland Avenue streetscape, since really only the parking lot and the spur and the water line have been done as far as I understand. The major disruption for businesses is coming this spring, summer, and fall on Midland Avenue. I'm once again extremely concerned for all independent businesses owners on Midland Avenue in regard to how this will affect their ability to survive. Without any work actually being done on Midland Avenue until late August, the businesses that I've spoken to including us, were down 20 to 35% over last summer. This is a pretty significant number, and it makes me concerned going into another year, another summer of construction, and whether it's actually happening or whether it's perception out in the valley that Basalt's under construction. It keeps people away, particularly during daytime hours. So I ask you again to please reconsider the scale, scope, timing, and budget of this project. Please maintain the existing head-in parking. Do the work in the spring or fall. Again, I don't understand all the engineering, but from before, I understood that the need to do the work in the summer was to continue the water line in a straight line, and now that's done. So perhaps there's an opportunity here to halt this work, to tear up the sidewalks, tear up the street, and all that during the summer months. So I ask you to please look at this yet again and see what you can do to alleviate another summer of lost revenue to your local businesses on Midland Avenue. So thank you, and appreciate your time.
Thank you, Laura. Anyone else? Come on up to the mic, please. Give us your name and address, serial
B.
number.
Schwaller, 605 Emma Road. I'm not in the town, but I'm near it. And I saw this thing in the paper the other day, and I wanted to call it to your attention. And it looks like Pitkin County is turning some land over to Basalt urban growth boundary. And I kind of got the idea, last meeting I was here, that you didn't want any more land in the urban growth boundary. So I wanted to make sure you knew about it, and I brought you a copy of the notice.
Okay.
Okay?
Thank you. Yeah, just to clarify, I think I made the comment, and I just said I didn't
Sir?
think, I said that I didn't think we should amend our urban growth boundary to accommodate a development proposal.
I don't know how it works.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Well,
is that the county's job or the city's job or the developer's job or what? So I'm looking for some clarification,
Well-
not at this moment, but in the future.
I could just give you a brief summary of the urban growth boundary, and then I'd recommend if you wanted a little more detail, you could check in with me and we could sit down and talk a little bit more about it offline. But the urban growth boundary is something that's set in our master plan. So that master plan is not a zoning document, it's a policy document that the town council basically sets the parameters for where they would want development to go in the town. This proposal that's likely referring to is the Black Mountain development.
5 altogether.
5
5.
5 different, well, I'll tell you, Pitkin County can't amend the town's growth area boundary.
That's what I thought.
So it's up to this town council here to make those amendments.
Well, I wanted to
So-
make sure you were aware of their meeting, December 20th,
Okay.
the commissioners. So better be there.
James has.
James said he didn't know about it either.
Ryan Lee showed me the notice before the meeting started here. It's a proposal to rezone multiple properties in the town's urban growth boundary. And so it's probably warrants a check-in with Picken County to
okay.
understand what they're doing.
And then I'll tell you one final piece to James's point there is the urban growth boundary doesn't necessarily include properties only within the town municipal limits. It contemplates potentially expansion. We don't necessarily have jurisdiction if it's outside of the municipal boundary. So Pitkin County would be within their rights to be able to rezone a property within Pitkin County.
That's what it says, rezoning all lands within the unincorporated area of Pitkin County within the Basalt urban growth boundary. They're just trying to clean things up, I imagine.
Probably so, but I thank you for that. I mean, I think
Yeah,
we'll make
but
sure
you
we're-
guys should know about
Yeah.
it
Okay, thank you.
and have some input. Who wants it?
I'll sure get it too.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And
This may just be
For your
the
vigilance.
countywide downzoning that's
I'll
in front of
get
them
you part of
next
it.
week, so.
thank you.
All right, anyone else like to address council? Calling in the audience, hearing none, then I would move that we move on to the mayor and council reports and comments. Councilors, floor is open for any comments, reports.
Go, after you.
I was just gonna say, I just wanted to thank, staff and the community for the Christmas tree lighting in the new park. It was lovely. I unfortunately missed the lighting itself of the tree. It was a little early. That's my only comment on that. But it was just so great to see the community out and kids playing in their little puffy jumpsuits, and it was adorable. It just it made my heart feel good.
How about the lighter of the tree? Did you like that part of the? Missed that part.
I missed that.
Yeah, my daughter, yeah, I had to hear about it from my daughter.
Like the kids rocking out on the stage with the performer. That was pretty great.
Brian, did you have?
Yeah, I would just like to extend a thank you, not only to all of staff, but to Stutzman Gerbaz. My son and I walked the project last Thursday night, and it was just incredible. Those guys put on such a good effort to get the water back on early, to get everything filled in. It was just quite the undertaking. He had over 60 guys there, and it was just awesome. And kudos to the team for planning it and executing. I think it just says a lot about the staff we have, and it's great. And then I also wanted to extend a thank you to James. Someone was talking to me about the pleasure of getting to work with James and how helpful he was with everything he needed. So just a kudos to all of staff. I know it's been a crazy year, and you guys just really keep the town going, and we can't thank you enough.
Well said. Anyone else?
I just wanted to say thank you to the workers at the Basalt Post Office. And just to say, thank you, and we know that they're working really hard. This is a hard time of year to be doing that job, and, there's not enough of them. So if you're in the post office, put a smile on your
those guys
face
are
and have
working hard,
gratitude in your
but
heart.
short-handed,
Yeah,
for Sure.
they're working really hard, so thank you.
All righty. Anyone else? I'll just repeat. I thought the Stutzman Gerbauer guys did an amazing job of completing that project. And the Christmas tree lightings were fantastic. And we had a very successful lighting of the menorah for the Basalt Jewish community out at Willits. And that was very well attended, and was especially important given the state of world affairs. So it was kind of an important evening. So hearing no more, then we would go to the manager's report.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Unfortunately, I think I'm gonna probably blow the schedule here, a little bit, because I have a couple things to talk to you about.
Okay.
And one of which is, going over expenses in our, capital construction fund a bit, which was requested, at the last meeting, so I just wanna make sure you all have up-to-date numbers. The first item, however, is a request from our Climate Action Collaborative. They're looking for a letter of support. They've submitted a grant application to the state, and they were successful to create a regional roadmap to net zero. And this grant's through the Colorado Energy Office. The CAC, they are aware of the fact that we've just recently adopted our own roadmap to net zero, but they are asking us to participate nonetheless, because there's a lot of our regional partners that are doing so. There won't be an obligation for us to adopt the product that they come up with, and for all we know, the map that we've created for ourselves is going to align with what we come up with regionally. But I think they want us to be part of the conversation, and there's no financial ask for us because they did receive grant funds, so it's really staff time. Michelle's team is willing and able to participate in, I think, 8 meetings. So really, tonight, I'm looking for a nod from you all to go ahead and sign this letter of support for that effort.
Anybody object? No, I think we're good.
Okay, great. And then you want to take one of those and pass them around. I'll leave that. Michelle, I have another copy for you.
Is there-
Okay, in Doug's absence, I'm going to be the finance director tonight. So
Let's see.
we'll go through these numbers, but at the last meeting, as you all know, we adopted the budget. And of course, in the budget, we're looking at more high-level numbers, and in this case, related to the Capital Construction Fund, which is the fund that we set up to track expenses and revenue associated with the Basalt Forward 2030 projects, so Midland Avenue, the green projects, and affordable housing. So Ryan had asked just to get an update on where we are with those numbers, and so I'll just briefly go through these, and I'll probably focus mainly on this Midland column since, that's had the most activity in the last year. But as we start at the top, this first section here looks at our sources, our actual expenditures through 11/30, revenues through 11/30. So we had the bond proceeds at $9.5 million, about $37,000, which was favorable interest upon closing of the bonds. We've had very good interest earnings, as Doug has talked to you about in his quarterly updates of $470,000. I will point out here that the interest is being split out among all of the different projects, and remind you that the Midland project, unlike the other two, is the only that is tax exempt. So we are associating that interest only with this Midland project. The grants that we've received to date, there was a reimbursement from Basalt Sanitation at $4,500. That CDOT grant that paid for some of our water infrastructure at $498,000. And then we have done some transfers in from the general fund. The first was a 2022 transfer of $455,000. If you recall, we had a required match for the CDOT grant, and that's what that is. Our ARPA funding, which stemmed from the COVID money, and that was just over $1 million. We had some severance taxes that were much higher than normal in 2022 that we had attributed to this project. And then we had some interest earnings from 2022 at $65,000, and then also transferred in from the general fund approximately $1.269 million. So that subtotal through 11/30 of this year is $13,385,000. So moving ahead, our accruals, or our anticipated budgeted revenue moving into next year, we've got some additional CDOT money coming in at $251,000. Our DOLA fiber grant that we got, so that was $158,000. And then we had 2 transfers in that were budgeted this for 2024. One from the general fund at $1.269 million, and then one from our restricted funding at $1.3. And if you recall, Holy Cross Energy was doing some cost sharing for conduit in the roadway, and Picken County the same at $50,000. So all told, with this anticipated and budgeted revenue for 2024, that's an additional $3.3 million, bringing our total up to $16,692,000. We have had some expenditures so far this year and those expenditures total 6.5 million, the majority of which was our capital outlay, so paying for the contractor, which was about 6.3 million of that. The other were smaller costs of professional and legal fees, and then if you remember, we had some bond closing fees and banking fees when we first issued those bonds. So the remaining money for 2024 that we will be that we have budgeted anyways is 10,439,000. Of that amount, about 1.2 million was set aside as a contingency. And so if we spent the entire, including contingency, that would be a total of $17 million for the entire Midland project. And that negative number down at the bottom is, if you recall, that would be the total balance of what that says is, if you spend the contingency, you're gonna need to dip into your reserves to come out with a bit more. So far, with what we've done in phase 1 and the beginning of phase 2 with the water line, has tracked much lower as a percentage than what we've set aside for the second phase. So we feel pretty confident that we won't need to spend it. That being said, as we move through the project, if there are add-ins and things like that that council approves, then we may use some of it. So, in a nutshell, that's where we are with the Midland Streetscape project. And I think a couple things to highlight in this is having these separated out, and the reason that we created this fund is to really show the tracking of costs and the fact that there's no intermingling of monies that was supposed to be for the green and went to Midland. We've kept them all separate, and we intend to use those separately for those discrete projects. And the other thing is something we described or talked about as we were leading up to the vote on Basalt Forward 2030, which was, it was intended that we would leverage these monies. And we talked earlier tonight in the work session about leveraging money for affordable housing. We've done just that in the green and received grants so far of about $550,000 from the state. And then also the same with the Midland project, coming in at over $2 million, almost $2.5 million on outside funding. So I think that's been a theme for this money, is to make that taxpayer dollar go further. And then I might just really briefly go over the green and affordable housing at a higher level. But you can see with the green, as far as the initial bond proceeds, we had about 2.135 million. Our interest has been doing well, so that interest is really adding to our bottom line, which is nice. At 115,000, and then we've had the $194,000 in our efforts so far from the grant be spent. Let's see. So moving forward on that next year, as we get under construction, we've got about $379,000 remaining out of the DOLA funds, and so our the total disbursements there is about $2.8 million, and then moving down to the bottom line, you can see our total fund balance after we're all in with the solar project, is we'll have 1.133 million left. So we'll be able to do hopefully some significant green projects. And I think we've got some cues from town council in the strategic work plan on things to look toward, and we'll work with our green team on ways that we can deploy that money. And then lastly, with the affordable housing, we started with 6 million. You can see that interest has been doing well also, and that's $323,000 added to the bottom line. As we talked about earlier, our big expense there was the capital outlay of buying those lots in Stotts Mill at 800,000. But our total expenditure to date is 923, and that included the bond closings and banking fees, that kind of thing. But we're left with $5.4 million in that total. So again, you know, I think with those interest earnings, that's really helped to prop that up. But as Michelle talked about earlier, we're really looking to leverage this money in partnerships and grants. And so I think we'll make it go further. So I hope that gets to what you were looking for, Councilor Slack.
Yeah.
Good
sorry
stuff.
to
Thank you.
Rehash all of it. but
Nope.
I just want to make sure that everyone could see it in one document.
It's a good
so that they
exercise.
know that-
That's an excellent summary.
Very good. And then I just wanted to mention two more quick things. Angela, you had mentioned about the post office and how hard they're working. You know, I understand you're probably one of the affected folks not getting mail down in the Willits area. I did send to a few of the residents down there that were asking the town if there was something we'd be able to do. And it was very timely that this report came out. The senators from Colorado are aware of the problem, and they've done a deep dive into what some of the issues are, and so they have a game plan on how to, you know, remedy this issue moving forward. I think practically speaking, it's going to take some time because it's about getting warm bodies into the post office, and pay and housing are difficult. And I think the wheels of being able to authorize greater pay don't happen at the local level. I think it's going to happen, you know, at the federal level. So it could take some time, but I do want to make sure, in case anybody's watching out there, you can, as I understand it, put a hold on your mail at the post office and come and collect it there in person for the time being, so that it's not, you know, just sort of sitting out there and you're waiting for it forever, and or get a P.O. box. I don't know if they have P.O. boxes for that number of people, but it looks like there are some short-term solutions at least, and we'll keep an eye on that. And then the last thing I wanted to say is, you know, I've heard council for a long time up here saying thank you to staff and thank you to Stutzman, but I wanted to make sure that council, from town staff's perspective, we thank you all for staying focused, for supporting us on this project. This Midland project is a big one. People have been working very hard on it, so I compliment our staff and I compliment Stutzman, but I don't want to leave you guys out because you guys are part of the team too, so thanks.
Great, thank you. Thanks for the numbers too. That's good information, thanks. So then that turns us to presentations. First up is the Midland Avenue Streetscape Project update. Catherine and Dave. Dave's not here tonight, so Catherine's going to do it. Yeah, that's a great picture. That is a great photo. Wow.
Just a couple of those. But, and, you know, you all have really summarized, you know, the great work that Stutzman did this week, and I'm really just largely here to echo that we felt like the project went off successfully this week. You know, this is one picture that just shows the extensive coordination that was required to have a successful project. You know, we had multiple utilities, gas, communications on site all day to make sure if anything came up that they were immediately available. You know, private locates were on site. We had the police, was in communications with the police and fire all day. And it was a real team effort, I guess I'd just say, between town staff, emergency services, the contractor. James, if you want to go to the next slide. Water was turned off at 8 a.m. on Thursday morning and back on by 8 a.m. the following morning. The team successfully completed the 7 water connections that were required. Fortunately, for all the reasons we're doing this project, we did have a valve break the day prior, so we added 2 more valves just to really up the ante on the challenge of the project for the day, and those were also completed successfully. And then the last slide just shows some final pictures. There's one picture of the mayor when he stopped by that evening with Shay, and then the guys working and ultimately turning on that last valve to get everyone back on water. As you may...
What I was
oh,
saying
sorry.
was you better get these damn holes filled back before 7 o'clock tomorrow.
Yeah. But as you can see, and I know you're all aware, we did receive some snow on Friday, so that hampered some of the efforts to complete some of the final paving. We are going to try to accomplish some of that this week, but it's all weather permitting. These cold temperatures, of course, aren't conducive to hot asphalt. As a summary, the project's largely wrapped up for 2023. There'll be some kind of cleanup work here and there you'll probably see in the next few weeks. But largely the heavy impacts are complete for this year, and we'll pick up again in late February, early March. I don't have a schedule of operations for you going into the next phase yet, but we'll be back before you just after the new year, and we'll speak to that schedule and how we expect to proceed. But largely, I do think last week's effort was a success, and I'm here to answer any questions y'all have.
One is 3 questions. One is paving, the second one's paving, and the third one is paving.
Yeah.
You look at the street, it looks like, in a normal circumstance, it's impossible. We got ice buildup and water, standing water, and, we have all sorts of things. But at the same time, we have a lot of what looks like engineers would call differential settlement out there, where in other words, potholes are forming already. And so a lot of that soft turf, we're going to have to do something to address that.
Sure.
I don't know what.
Yeah, we'll stay on top of it through the winter. It won't be ideal. I talked to Robbie, that's her plowing route, and told her I'll buy her coffee every week this winter or something. I know it's going to be a little bit rocky while we're in this temporary condition. But we're going to try to get some paving done this week, but if the weather doesn't allow, we'll just have to stay on top of those potholes going into the winter as best we can. So.
Great. So, Grand Junction, maybe we'll just see, huh?
I think that's where it was coming out of.
Okay. And, it's not going to be an ideal condition, but if it can get us through the winter, that would be.
Exactly.
Great.
It's a balance of making sure, we're good enough, but also knowing we're not investing too much, knowing it's going to get torn out in February, March.
Okay. Any questions for Catherine? Great work, thanks.
Yeah, thank you.
You didn't get caught in the snow that night, did you?
I did
I think you
sleep for a
did.
few hours. Yeah. Others were out.
Great job, Catherine. You
Thank
did a wonderful job coordinating all that. That was a handful, so appreciate it. Okay, next item are council actions. First up is interview and appointment for a Basalt Green Team member. Interview and appointment for Sean Setterfield. Sean, good seeing you.
Yes, thank you, council. Thanks for having me. Like you said, my name's Sean Satterfield. I know a lot of you from the community, obviously. I'm here to ask your permission, your approval to join the Green Team Council. I think my family and I have lived here for 8 years. It doesn't seem that long, but I see a lot of great things in Basalt happening. I think as a member of the Green Team, I could see that future for my children and all our children being ushered in responsibly and sustainably, if at all possible. So I think as an architect, I have a lot of knowledge of the built environment. That's not all the Green Team is doing, but I think that's a large factor. So I won't take up too much of your time, but I just want to say thank you for having me and considering me for a position on the Green Team.
Any questions for Sean? Thank you very much for that summary.
Do you compost currently?
I do. We have the big bucket too. Big-
Great answer.
I don't know why we need it, but my wife needs it, so.
You got
That's
my
the first
vote.
question for Green Team. Any questions for
Are
Sean?
we gonna let Michelle do her little
Yeah, do you
spiel?
wanna,
Well, this would, Sarah would have been here, but she unfortunately went home sick today, but I'll give you the spiel. The Green Team was initially formed in 2007 with the intent to advocate for more resilient and sustainable Basalt community. Sean is a local resident and lead certified architect who is familiar with sustainable building practices. Sean has expressed his commitment to Basalt's success and a willingness to take a hands-on approach to ensure Basalt is a strong and thriving community. He has attended 2 Green Team meetings to date and received a unanimous recommendation to be approved for the board.
yeah. Great.
Any other questions?
No.
Mayor, I move the town council appoint Sean Satterfield to the Basalt Green Team for a 3-year term to end December 12th, 2026.
Second.
Been moved and seconded. All those in favor, aye?
Aye.
Great. Thank you, Sean. We look forward to
Thank you,
working with
council.
you, and thanks for your
volunteering.
interest and service here.
Of course. Thank
And
you.
composting.
Next item, 7B, is a public hearing, resolution number 47, series of 2023. It's a resolution of the Town Council of Basalt, Colorado, ratifying the town planner building official interpretation on the Stotts Mill design guideline provision related to second floor roofs over first floor covered by entry porches. Basalt, James?
Jim and James, would you guys like to come up? Thank you, Mayor. This is a public hearing to consider an appeal request of the town staff's interpretation of one of the Stotts Mill design guideline provisions. Appeals of the staff interpretations on Stotts Mill design guidelines, as well as code interpretations, may be heard by the council at a public hearing per the PUD. Specifically, we have a request from Jim and Teresa Carr, who own Lot 10, Block 1 in the Stotts Mill PUD, which is one of the 28-foot wide lots in the central portion of the PUD. Let me go to the plan. Lot 10 is located right here, and this is North Park, just for reference. They are appealing town staff's interpretation that a second floor porch with a full second floor roof, as you can see here, would not be permitted in the covered porch area, which is between the 10-foot covered porch setback and the 16-foot setback for living space in the PUD. And once again, we've called this the entry porch area. The Carrs have designed a residence that includes a 2-story porch element with a full porch roof on the second floor, as you can see on the front page of the memo, and also can bring it up in larger scale there. Staff's interpretation is based on several provisions in the Stotts Mill design guidelines that were approved as part of the Stotts Mill PUD. The first being section 5 of the, on page 5 of the design guidelines. It relates to covered entry porches. It discusses provisions related to requiring a first floor covered entry porch of 1 story. And then the second sentence of that provision discusses the ability to have a second floor story with living space above the front porch, so long as it's set back 16 feet from the front property line, so beyond that covered entry porch area. There's also a provision on page 9 of the Stotts Mill design guidelines, which were in your packet, which speaks to having no decks occur above the main level unless they are cantilevered or integrated into the structure design. And so pursuant to these provisions, staff interpreted that a second floor porch with a full second floor roof is not allowed in the area between 10 foot and 16 feet, in that it's limited to 1-story elements. Staff also notes that staff has permitted several of the residences being built to have a deck above the front entry porch, because a deck has not been counted as one story in the past in the town code. And we don't believe that a deck above an entry porch considerably adds to the massing of the front porch element. As discussed, the interpretation is based on the language in the guidelines, but the intent of these provisions, when they're read together, were to provide a prominent one-story element that provides a pedestrian scale to the residence. Staff believes that a second-story porch roof above the entry porch potentially detracts from the pedestrian scale, and staff wouldn't desire having such a scenario throughout the PUD. So staff would recommend this evening hearing from the CARs, as well as taking public comments and then providing council discussion. Staff in your staff memo has outlined 3 potential decision options. One could be to approve the resolution ratifying the town's staff's interpretation. The second option could be to deny the resolution and direct staff to amend the administrative interpretation to permit the design scenario proposed by the CARs. Or a third one could potentially be to approve the resolution ratifying the staff interpretation and then directing staff to approve an administrative site-specific waiver for their design, which is a process that's established in the PUD. This would permit it on this lot, but not allow it on others without individual waivers for specific designs. And I believe Jeff Conklin, the town attorney, also has some comments.
So, yeah, I would just like to clarify something before we hear from the applicant. It's common for design guidelines to appear as covenants, restrictive covenants for land development. This is a little unusual. These design guidelines are actually baked into the PUD and were part and parcel of the land use approval. So this is fully within the town's authority. We're not, participating in a private covenant. So this is a zoning matter. I read the full packet. I read some of the case law, which I read in planning school, 150 years ago. But I would just advise the applicant, in the interest of using your best time, I just want to clarify what the source of the town's authority is for the review on this. And it seemed like the tenor of some of the citations and some of the commentary sort of was almost hinting that the town was getting outside the base paths in terms of our authority and discretion. So, no, okay. So I would just not counsel that we go there anyway. Jeff?
Well, I was going to just add a few comments to just kind of provide a little more detail into staff's thinking, and I'll try not to be too redundant with what James said, but we don't get these very often, so just want to make sure that you kind of go through this and understand where staff is coming from. As James presented, the applicants are seeking to develop this second-story covered porch up to the 10-foot setback on the lot for the up to the 10-foot setback. So the question is this permitted? Is this prohibited? Which question should we be answering? And it's a little bit of two sides of the same coin. For example, our land use code says these uses are permitted, and if they're not listed, they're prohibited. And so what does the PUD and the design guidelines say? What do those say? The PUD guide says you have to comply with the design guidelines. And then as James kind of outlined those relevant sections of the design guidelines, but there is a section titled decks, porches, patios, and walls. And the design guidelines are kind of intended to say, hey, if you can have a deck, porch, patio, and walls under these circumstances and with these conditions. And they've stepped in to regulate that area. And each of those words is used distinctly, deck and porch, but they're undefined. They're undefined in the PUD guide, they're undefined in the design guidelines and the code, but they have to mean something. And so I think the common usage of the word deck is something that's uncovered, and with a porch, something that's covered. So then we look at, all right, well, what else is in the design guidelines? It says, no deck shall occur above the main level of the structure unless cantilevered and integrated into the structure design. And so staff is thinking, okay, deck, that means an uncovered element. And, even if there's a disagreement on the interpretation of deck, whether we're to include a second story element, I think it's staff positions that, well, a deck that's covered could not be integrated into the design elements based on these other provisions of the design guidelines. The design guidelines also say you're required to provide a first floor covered entry porch, 1 story in height, and you shall be allowed to have a second story living area above the porch so long as it is set back a minimum of 16 feet. And again, this is seeking to go up to 10 feet. It also says, it's the intent of the design guidelines to encourage design solutions which reduce the visual mass and develop proportions and details appropriate to the scale and to the site. Covered porches are encouraged at the street elevation of structures. It doesn't discuss them on the second level. And then, I think it's in the design guidelines, there's some 2-dimensional drawings. I don't think they're two-dimensional, and so it wasn't intended to show how the massing of these fit within the setbacks. And so staff's, interpretation is that there's nothing that, while there's nothing that there's not express prohibition on second floor covered porches within that setback area. There's not a provision that says shall not. The way the regulations are structured is there's nothing to say that you can do this under these conditions. And to give meaning to all of these different provisions, it would kind of gut some of the meaning of the rest of them. And that you could have a result where you could have a deck on these conditions, you could have a second story living story on these certain conditions. You have to have a first floor porch on these conditions, but you could have a second floor porch with no conditions. You wouldn't have to comply with that it's integrated into the structure like a deck. And so, looking at all this together, it was staff's position that this just is not what was permitted by the design guidelines. Are the design guidelines perfect? But no, but reading them together, this is the reasonable interpretation. Staff can in reading these together, get behind an interpretation that a second floor covered porch could be permitted up to the 16-foot setback, but not all the way up to the 10-foot setback. And so, anyway, I just wanted to kind of go through that in a little bit more detail before applicant presentation.
Can you just quickly opine, I guess, is James option C a lawful option for the town council to pursue?
Would be there's criteria for the variance review that could be done on that staff level. So it's possible. There may be other implications as a result of that, but it's possible to do that.
Okay.
It'd be important for staff and the council to think about, what factual circumstances exist here in granting a variance and what might be distinct elsewhere.
We ought to hear from the applicants. Good evening, gentlemen.
Thank you, Mayor Kane. Let me address, first of all, the question that you raised at the outset, and that is to make clear to the members of the council and to the public generally that what we're interpreting here is a zoning ordinance. And the power to pass a zoning ordinance such as this PUD ordinance is uncontested. We have no dispute about that whatsoever. As a matter of fact, staff was very responsive to our inquiries when we were shopping this property to provide a copy of the design guidelines and the covenants, which we did review very carefully in making our decision to purchase this property. So there isn't really any question about that. It's also a very legalistic inquiry that is before the council tonight. Because we are interpreting a zoning ordinance, which is a legislative act of the town council. And if this is ever reviewed in a court of law, it's interpreted like any other piece of legislation. And that is to say, it is to be construed according to the language that's used in the ordinance itself, and not to go beyond the four corners with definitions of items such as the common usage, I think, as Mr. Conklin pointed out, of what does a deck mean. If it's in the code, fine. We do have definitions in the design guidelines. And, you know, a PUD ordinance becomes a particularized zoning envelope for the property in question. But it is an imperfect document because it can't possibly address all of the issues that come up. And that's why most PUD provisions, including this one, say that in the event of a conflict, the more strict regulation will govern, or if an issue is not discussed at all, it's referred to the town code to fill in the blanks, if you will. So, for example, in staff's interpretation, they reference a definition of living space or living area, which comes from the International Residential Code, which the town of Basalt has incorporated by reference. So there you have an example of that code filling in the blank here. And we'll get to that in a minute. But I want to defer all of the legalistic discussion for the time being and tell you what we have in mind and why we have in mind for the design of this property and why we think it's allowed under this under the governing documents here. James?
Yeah. Good evening, Town Council and Mayor Kane. My name is James Carr, and I'm here tonight to speak on behalf of my dad, Jim, the property owner of Lot 10, as his oldest son and architect. The Stotts Mill development is rimmed with views of the mountains surrounding the valley. To take advantage of this, my parents sought out a modest 28-foot lot that would provide them with a view. They purchased Lot 10 across the street from North Park because it framed Basalt Mountain without any obstruction. I was tasked with developing a concept facilitated by the constraints of the design guidelines that took advantage of our premium view. To do this, I designed a home with a 2-story covered front entry porch, aligned with the 10-foot setback and within the 6-foot zone designated for porches. This feature was employed because we thought it was allowed. Nowhere in the control documents does it preclude our design from doing so within this zone. Further, the control documents do express language stating covered porches are encouraged at the street elevation of structures. Here's a design progress rendering of that front elevation, which you guys have, which also is included in the packet materials. We're here to discuss the allowance of this 2-story covered front entry porch along with the street elevation, and to appeal to staff's interpretation that this design is non-conforming with the design guidelines. The purpose of the control document is to create a standard for promoting unique designs within these constraints. It records at great length that the objective of this development is to curate creativity, diversity, and authenticity of design. Numerous provisions express language encouraging techniques for creating variation, including the use of porches, dormers, roof pitches, unique material palettes, and most importantly, no requirement on the use of any particular architect. The most appealing aspect of this development is this very requirement. The property owners must recruit their own architects, guaranteeing distinctiveness. As an architect, I have a vested interest in helping other designers gain tools to distinguish their homes from others. This is with the hope of ensuring that collectively our projects stand out and contribute to the character of this community. These lots are small and challenged with an incredibly strict program. 18-foot wide homes distributed just 10 feet apart, governed by a tight zoning envelope with only 2,000 square feet to spend, which would also need to include a garage if desired. Because of this, the utilization and allocation of space is paramount. An objective observation in considering the state of the construction in Stotts Mill indicates the struggle to design within this envelope. There is not a single dormer or any volumetric distinction in the roof lines of 18-foot wide homes from front to back, as encouraged by these design guidelines. I say this to convey how difficult it is to design adequate space within the dimensional and height requirements of these sites. The fear is that these sorts of distinguishing elements are left out as a function of necessity, and that our development is in jeopardy of sameness. I empathize with these challenges as a result of my own investigations and have looked for creative opportunities to develop interest in other ways. This is what the two-story covered entry porch provides. This feature, this is the best value proposition to inject variation and diversity. It affords expression without the cost of precious living area or interior functionality, and in doing so promotes the very provisions and ambitions of the control documents themselves within the requirements of the PUD. This covered porch gives our entire design its identity. It exploits the use of our 18 feet to capitalize on the use of this property's best and only view year-round. It's not the house across the street from the park, it's the house with the great porch. There are many examples of two-story covered porches in neighboring developments. In Southside, the development right next to Stotts Mill, they can be found all over. The perfect comparative example to our lot is 323 Branding Way, just blocks away from Lot 10. Do you have a picture of that?
Yeah, I do. Pass these out.
Yeah. It should be on the last page. This property uses a two-story covered entry porch to the exact same effect. 10 feet off the sidewalk, leveraging their view across Southside Park. There's even precedent in Stotts Mill. The apartment buildings have second-story covered porches, 10 feet off the sidewalk, one of which my parents live in. It's already part of the well-established vernacular of this town and this neighborhood. I worked tirelessly for weeks on this appeal because I believe that this feature is that important to the successful trajectory of this development, and that this interpretation is not founded in the PUD. There is room in these guidelines to guide designs in a positive direction and to make Stotts Mill a successful model development. We hope that you find our argument compelling and that you will allow this design and construction of two-story covered front entry porches for all lots in Stotts Mill.
All right, thank you. This is a public hearing, so at this point I'm going to ask to see if there's anybody that's calling in or in the audience that would like to comment on this request. Okay, hearing none, then I would ask if there are questions of counsel of the applicant. Questions?
I guess my question, I totally understand your fight, and appreciate your design. But on the first, it's on page 5 of 19 or page 40 in our packet. And how does this then conform to shall be allowed to have a second story with a living area above the porch as long as the second story is set back a minimum of 16 feet if your porch is at 10 feet?
Mm-hmm.
Is that where's the?
Well, as defined in the IRC, our space is outside of the envelope and is not living area.
Because it's a porch, it's not
Right,
considered
it's
a living
outside
area.
space.
It's actually, the definition of living area, which is a provision that's borrowed from the International Residential Code, is space outside a dwelling unit. So it's exterior space. The porch is entirely exterior space. It is not, under the definition, living space.
Living, okay.
Also, it is not counted towards the total floor area, which is the
FAR.
definition in the guidelines that defines the maximum 2,000 that's available for development. So the porch, whether it's on the first level or on the second level, is something that is literally not living space by definition. And that's why it's so valuable, because, you know, a 6-foot porch by 18 feet is about 108 square feet. So that's additional square foot that you can stand on and look at the mountain and not pay for it as part of the 2,000 square foot cap. So that's why it is so valuable, why it's free, if you will. So hopefully that answers your question.
Yeah.
And by the way, I do want to respond to Mr. Conklin's comment about the reference to street elevation of structures. Do you remember where that's provided for in the code?
Which provision?
Where is it? Is it on page 9?
I'm not sure what you're looking for.
The reference, I'm referring to the provision, Jeff, maybe you can help me, that talks about the street elevation of the structure.
Yeah, it's building massing.
Oh, right.
Yeah, I can read it again. It says, "It's the intent of these design guidelines to encourage design solutions which reduce the visual mass and develop proportions and details appropriate in scale to the site. Covered porches are encouraged at the street elevation of structures."
Right, covered porches are encouraged at the street elevation of structures. Now, the way Mr. Conklin read it, he was thinking that the porch has to be at the street level. And that's an incorrect reading of it, because street elevation modifies the structure, which is the building. So what is the street elevation of the building? It's the side that faces the street. Just as there's an east elevation of the structure, or a west elevation of the structure, or the south elevation of the structure that faces the alley. So that is not descriptive of the level that the porch has to be at, okay? That's the way that provision should be read. And you know, this is how you have to read these ordinances. You know, if it's not in the language, it's not a matter of interpretation, it's a matter of invention. You're adding something that isn't there. We have to deal with the language that's here. We did when we bought the property. I would like to, Councilor Slack, let me also draw your attention to that covered porch provision, which is the one that staff principally relies on. All single-family and duplex residential units shall be required to provide a first-floor covered entry porch of 1 story in height. Okay? Now, you might say that, well, why have a covered entry porch? Why say both a first-floor covered entry porch and a 1 story in height porch? Isn't that a little bit redundant, right? Well, if you think about it, the provision deals with a requirement of having a porch, okay? The design guidelines in a couple of places make clear that you have to have a covered entry porch. Now, step back a second and think about it. The design guidelines are dated May 2020. The PUD ordinance was signed by our mayor in February of 2021. So obviously there was some lag, if you will, between the creation of the design guidelines and the adoption of the ordinance that we're construing several months later. There are some renderings in the design guidelines that don't even have porches on them. It wasn't clear, at least from looking at the so-called approved renderings, one of which shows they all show 4-foot porches, which is not consistent with what the guidelines require. You have to have at least 6 feet on your porches. So there's some disconnect there.
Yeah.
It's a guideline, okay? We have a requirement of there being at least a 6-foot porch on the first level of the property. Now, you could have a 1-story porch on the second level of the property. And beneath it, you could have grass where you store your bikes and your barbecues. That's a possibility, okay? So the doubling up of first floor covered entry porch of 1 story in height is a way of focusing what is that requirement. And that requirement is every house has to have a porch. We're okay with that. But that can't be read to imply that you cannot have a 2nd-story porch, because the 10 words that would answer the question conclusively are not found anywhere in the design guidelines, and that is no covered second-story porches are
Okay,
allowed.
I don't want this to be a filibuster. I want to get some discussion from our council about the merits of this. The predicament the town staff finds themselves in is that we have rigorously enforced this provision of the design guidelines for how many guys? 4 or 5 previous builders? And so.
Have any of them appealed, Mr. Mayor?
Not to my knowledge,
No,
no.
they
So none of them have asserted the rights that we're asserting here.
Okay, but here, I'm going to suggest something that the pace that this is going could save us an hour or so. And I would enjoy some discussion with the council. This strikes me clearly as a case where, in order to accommodate your wish, we would have to go back and amend our design guidelines. I just think it's patently, unbelievably unfair to have told buyers that they can't do this. And we don't know if they had a desire to do it. They never expressed it. Maybe they don't. It creates an unbelievably unfair advantage in terms of valuation of these properties. And so we're creating a windfall, technically, I mean, relatively speaking, by basically granting this essentially variation or variance or amendment or overruling the staff's interpretation. So I think where I am inclined to go with this, and first of all, I think it's a wonderful design. I think Stryker Brown are really solid architects. I think it's a beautiful design. But I think you can't get there just by being a single applicant and coming in and trying to have us, throw basically our design guidelines out. I don't know what the time implications of this are. You're probably getting ready to dig. I don't know where you are when you're with your scheduling. But I'm just giving you my impression off the top is this looks to me like, in the spirit of good governance and fairness to everybody at Stotts Mill, if this is the kind of thing we're going to allow, I don't think we want to get into arm wrestling, and look forward to a future where there are going to be 42 more requests for variations from a design guideline, and we create this precedent, and then we have no ability to say no. So hold your comments, please. I'd like to get some feedback from council about this.
What is the depth of the upstairs porch, and is the living space that's behind it, is it that at 16 feet?
Yes, that's at 16 feet.
Is living space defined somewhere in the design guidelines?
In the International
Besides-
Residential Code.
Yeah, I heard that.
I think we refer to that.
It's in your packet. The last page of the definitions that I cited, I think, James, you included that.
Yeah, I did. I'll bring it up just a
If I
second.
may, the reason that we have defined the living space in the memo is to clarify that living space or a covered porch is allowed 16 feet or further back from the front setback. That's why that definition is in there. A deck on the second level would be allowed 10 feet or further back. So that's the comparison there, so that you have both of those pieces of information.
If it wasn't covered, would it be allowed?
Yes,
It would be a deck.
It'd be a deck.
it would be allowed. But if it's a covered porch or living space, the design guidelines ask for it to be set back 16 feet or further.
Where does it say covered porches are not, are subject to a 16-foot setback? That's different than the other setback. Can you point that out to me, please?
Absolutely. It's the last line in the covered entry porch section. And it says, as long as the second story is set back a minimum of 16 feet from the property line, second story with living area above the porch is allowed.
Our design meets that requirement. The living space is set back 16 feet from the,
So it's also for a covered porch, right? So the requirement of the 16-foot setback is for the covered porch.
where does it say
or
covered?
living
It doesn't
space.
say it there anywhere. Can you show me where it says covered porch is subject to a 16-foot setback? It's not a question of a variation, because it's not in here. We're not asking to depart from the language of it. We're asking that the staff interpretation, which adds language that is not in there, can't be enforced.
And council, again, just again, trying to read all these provisions together, give them meaning, not have an outcome that's potentially absurd. They're also trying to give meaning to you can have a deck up to the 10 feet if it meets this requirement. So it says you can have a deck if it meets these requirements. What the applicant is saying is that because it's silent with respect to covered porches in this 10 to 16-foot range, it should be permitted and not even have to meet the condition that would otherwise apply to a deck. And so that's kind of what the staff was grappling with, like, how do we fit all of these together to give them meaning? And that's the, again, prohibited versus permitted. If you're going to do these things, here's how you can do them. That's what,
Yeah.
the way staff
Yeah,
is.
I just think it's very unhealthy for the town to be cutting individual deals with individual, and you pose arguments, but these other homeowners are not here. They're not, your neighbors and folks that are gonna live next door to you have no opportunity to comment on this. I guess they do. It's a public hearing. They could have come, but, anyway, I've stated my position. I think we ought to go through a process of amending the design guidelines to accommodate a design like this, but not try to do it in the context of some kind of, novel interpretation of the guidelines. I just don't think that's really appropriate for the town. Go ahead, Ryan.
Does this, if we approved this one, can we clarify the language going forward and just be done with it?
That is an option.
That's the third option, correct?
Well, just let me clarify this, because with James, I think the third option was set up to grant a variance, but like, another option would be to amend the design guidelines, right?
Yeah, another option would be to amend the design guidelines. We, as the town, have the authority to do that because it's part of the PUD and not just a private covenant.
Yeah, I'd be more amenable to that than a carve-out. I'm not a big fan of carve-outs. Just because of the complications it creates later. And I think the design and the functionality that you guys are contemplating, makes sense. You trying to use the space to the best of your abilities and for livability and all that. But I think we need to look at it in totality in the neighborhood so everybody has the opportunity to do something like that.
We most likely would support you, but just procedurally, this feels really wrong to me.
Yeah.
So that's where I'm at.
I'm guessing there was reasons for the way that the design guidelines were written originally, however, with the various setbacks. Frankly, I'm gonna be honest, to me, the second story here is a deck. It's a covered deck, it's not a porch. A porch, and I just looked up definitions on the internet, that's why I have a laptop in front of me, multiple definitions of a porch, and it says, at the entry of a building. I'm not done.
Yeah, sorry.
I think this is a question of semantics. I think you have a design that you're in love with, and I totally understand that. And so in order to make it work, you're sort of backing into the semantics that work to support the design. So we can look at changing the design guidelines if my fellow counselors are interested in that. But I don't think that this is a two-story porch. I think this is a deck that is not compliant as it currently stands with the design guidelines.
Are you referring to the picture that you're looking at, or are you referring to our design?
I'm looking at the,
Or computer screen.
the computer screen rendering of the architectural design.
Thank you.
So, council, further questions, discussion?
Well, I would like James to, if he could address, was there a reason why we have, each of the different
Yeah,
setback? What was the thought process
mean-
there? Do you remember? I know you remember everything. You're like an elephant.
well, my recollection in working with the applicant or developer's planner at the time and architects as well was to provide kind of a prominent element that could be closer to the streetscape, that provided a pedestrian scale for the most part. And the way to do that was to provide a one-story element.
Can I add something about pedestrian scale? It's not in the documents and, at all. There's no reference to pedestrian scale. And further, if this was such an important issue, why was there no bulk plane restrictions on this property?
Why was there what, please?
No bulk plane restrictions There's a diagram in the packet that would, indicate what that could be. But, it's all about two-dimensional space, and we're talking about a three-dimensional thing. If it was so important, why wouldn't that, be in the documents?
What is a bulk plane?
It can be defined in the packet. It's an offset for access to light and air for pedestrians off a sidewalk or a public way. And it deals with width of building and sight lines out.
Okay.
Where does that bulk come from?
Well,
So, this is, just because this view isn't represented here, I'm just looking at this document only. I haven't had a chance to look at all the other 5. And just looking at the document, reviewing the information here, I'm more of the option 3 sort of thing. I understand where everybody's coming from with their comments here, but, I'm only reading what was in the packet.
yeah,
And everybody's sort of interpretations of
that's fair
that.
enough.
And I don't think that I think the precedent is we shouldn't be, like 5 other people miss their opportunity. That's equally as
That's fair
sort of
enough.
odd.
That's,
I think too, if I might just add something, is I think to go and then allow this second story porch to then proliferate in the neighborhood is contrary to what the intent was here. You may choose option 3, but I think it's pretty clear that, yes, okay, so it may not be explicit in here because there's not a definition perhaps of what a porch and what a deck is, but there is a distinction between decks and porches. So, I think anybody that is versed in what these things are can draw a conclusion of what the intent was. Why wasn't there a bulk plane in there? Well, probably because they're written to be simplistic and ideally understood in plain language. The bulk plane is a pretty lofty idea that is more difficult to understand by the average person. So I think as I read through these, it seems to me that your design, while I like it, it's very nice, isn't allowed. And I think if council wants to say, okay, it's not explicit, we'll give deference to the applicant here, I wouldn't necessarily, or I would take a lot of thought before saying, okay, now we're going to allow this design throughout, because that wasn't the intent. I think what James described and what his memory is that what you see at the pedestrian scale when you're walking by is to create sort of that front porch feel and look, and that's what it was. It wasn't to create that additional massing that you see on the second level. So
How far would you have
let
to,
us complete this conversation here. Okay.
how far would you have to pull that second story deck, porch, whatever language we want to call it, back,
16 feet.
which is where the living area starts?
Which is 12.5% reduction in our square footage that we can use.
Or you could just create a deck and not a covered porch. I mean, you'd still have that additional square footage on the upper level to enjoy the view and have, free space that's not counted in the FAR. It's just, you want the coverage, which.
Where is the provision that says you
Okay,
can't put a roof on it?
No, what I think is when you read these, you can see what the intent of the language is. And I
Well,
think-
the intent has to be divined from the 4 corners of the document, Mr. Mahoney. Okay? You can't read in these common, everybody knows what the difference between a deck and a porch is. If you look at your internet, some say the deck is in the back, the porch is in the front, some say the deck is at the ground level, some say porches are relevant. They're all over the field. There isn't any common knowledge. And if you want it defined, put it in the ordinance, because the ordinance is a restriction on use. It's narrowly construed in favor of the rights of property owners to use their property to their unrestricted use.
But then
okay?
why in here do they make a distinction between decks and porches?
Don't ask me, but we have to look at this document. And this document doesn't define either one of
So
them.
then do we refer to the town code, which says
You
if
can,
it's not
but
in there, then
You
it's
can,
not
but
allowed?
the town code doesn't define deck or porch. It's not in there. And all the definitions are in your packet. So
And-
you see, it's not defined there.
And if I could just offer one more principle of interpretation, you have a word that's capable of more than one reasonable interpretation, you look at the intent and of the word. And that does allow you to go outside the four corners of the document, because the four corners of the document, if it was clear and unambiguous, you wouldn't need to do that. And so, in any event, the point being, when you have a word that is capable of more than one reasonable interpretation, which I think is the position of the applicant, you looking at intent as a
Well, we
statutory
clearly have
construction.
uncovered a lack of clarity and a problem in the design guidelines. It's, regardless of the outcome of tonight's action, it's gonna have to be fixed so that we don't face this every building permit at Stotts Mills. So it looks like so far, there have been two options put on the table here. One is Dieter's, which is that we approve option C, that we agree with the applicant's interpretation for this one item, and then direct staff to bring forward a design guideline amendment to avoid this problem in the future. Or we agree with the staff's interpretation, we put this on hold until we amend the guidelines. So they seem to be the two options that are out there. Or there are more options. You could just completely agree with the staff and not amend the guidelines, but at any rate.
This is a weird one, and I feel for these guys, and I would also say I get where we're coming from on the staff level and the interpretation. But at the end of the day, I think we all live in Colorado for one reason, and that's to enjoy the views, enjoy the fresh air. To me, I don't see a problem with the second story porch. I know the interpretation is not that great, so I would just say let the people have their porches and redesign it and just
It's not
let
like they
it
can't
be.
have a view just because they don't have a porch.
I get it, but it's not like, I don't know, this just falls in that vague area where I don't think we should have to make this decision. This should actually be an HOA thing, it shouldn't even be us, number one.
Yeah.
Should, but.
That's one thing that's another matter we're gonna have to consider.
Yeah, we're here, and
Yeah,
so that's my suggestion, is
This
I
is not
say,
the kind of stuff
I say
we
everyone
wanna
should
do.
be able to have a covered porch, and I would throw that option out there too, just to really confuse everyone, and, because we're restricting these people from having a porch for what reason? Because of the vague design guideline that we interpret different than they interpret, they have some, it's all just interpretation.
You wanna make a motion?
I mean, yeah, I will make a motion for number 2, to let the cars have their porch and let anyone else have a porch up to the 10-foot setback and the 16-foot living setback,
So
and we set it in
approve it.
stone, approve it, let it be. If other people want decks, great. The people that already built their house, they can add decks too, because their things are boxes and they're 16-foot setback probably anyways.
Approve it subject to amending the design
Yeah, and then
guidelines.
amending the design guidelines to clarify this so that we don't have to deal with it again.
And
Is
specific,
that what 2 says, though?
I don't think so.
And a condition that
no.
we don't, there's a
says-
prohibition on enclosing the
Two
space.
says just
We're not gonna have that battle with you,
Yeah.
you know, 6 months down the line, where all of a sudden you wanna enclose the top porch. We would put a strict prohibition on that.
Yeah, yeah.
If you enclose it, it by definition becomes
they are.
living
area.
space,
Yeah.
which counts towards the square footage. It would not be, and then it would be subject to the 16-foot setback restriction if it's living space. This is not living space.
And that's I think that's the part of the argument, that coupling that kind of fulcrum of it with the fact that it's cool to have a second-story porch for, like, just enjoying it. I think we need to clarify that so people understand that that is what they can do, and that is only what they can do, and this is what a deck and this is what a porch is, and make sure that's super clear there, but that, yeah, I mean, I think it'll be nice for the people who live there and the people around if they want to do it too.
So you got a motion in part.
So,
Do you want to clarify
Just
it?
so if I heard it right, the motion was to disagree with staff's interpretation, agree with the applicant, and then also to provide direction to staff to bring back just kind of separate from their application and appeal, but bring back an amendment to the design guidelines to clarify that
what the applicants are doing is permitted.
Yes.
Yes, that's, and I'll second that. As long as we do porch and deck too, define that in there, just,
I apologize to
Yeah.
staff. I know you guys worked hard on this.
yeah, and
And I think
No,
the
it's not. That's
clarification
pretty clear,
between
yeah.
living, what
So
living
we have a
space
motion.
actually is.
Is there a second?
I seconded it.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded. Pam, please call the roll.
Okay, let's begin with David Knight,
Yes.
Angela Anderson,
Yes.
Elise Hoddle,
No.
Ryan Slack,
Yes.
Bill Kane,
Yes.
and Dieter Schindler.
Yes.
Motion carries.
Okay,
Go for
thank
it.
you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
It is a nice one.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Everyone porch.
Thanks for bringing this to help us make sure we get it
I
clear.
would like to thank staff, particularly James Lind,
Yeah.
for helping us get to this point. Thank you.
Thank you.
No, not as far as
Good luck.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Okay, next order of business. Thank you, gentlemen. Good luck with it. But I think, you know, just as a afterthought too, this sounds probably impossible to achieve, but I think we should somehow make it clear to the others that did not seem to pursue this option, that we are gonna amend the design guidelines, so, you know, I don't know how practical it's gonna be to try to extend the roof and, you know, cantilever a deck and do all the rest of that, but, you know, at least they know that we would be open to it if they wanna modify their building designs.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, most of them are through one contractor, so we can,
Okay. Somebody's gonna invent a pretty good system, rapid deck development. Yes, ma'am.
Oh, I'm just.
Oh, I thought you
looking
had
at
it. Well, by prior agreement, David Knight's going to take over for me at this point, and we have two more items. These are authorizing contracts for Summit Recreation for Albany Park. Is anybody here to speak to that one other than staff? It's so cool. The fish is just phenomenal. Are we going to get one of those big trout? One of those?
We are, that's the
Oh,
best
wow.
thing.
That is, the kids are gonna go nuts. That is really a great deal.
Get out of here, Mayor.
Okay, and then the second one is,
Wayfinder.
okay,
Signs.
thank you.
You gotta run.
We got a big deal going on. This is the gavel, David. It's all the wrist, it's on the wrist. Thank you, guys.
This is a rowdy,
Bye, Bill.
rowdy.
Look, Bill.
audience here.
Sorry about that.
Bill, did you drive? Or drive or walk?
No, I'm walking.
Do you wanna leave that in my office, your
No,
computer?
I'm good.
Take it to dinner?
All right, next up is item 7C, resolution of the Town Council of Basalt, Colorado, approving an agreement rather, for professional services with Summit Recreation for procurement and installation of new playground equipment and surfacing for Albany Park. James?
yeah, thank you. This is consideration of a resolution that would approve of a contract with Summit Recreation for procurement and installation of new playground equipment and surfacing at Albany Park. As background, replacement of the Albany Park playground has been in the town's capital improvements plan for some years now. And there is $600,000 in the 2023 budget for Albany Park projects. Staff put out an RFQ in early summer for the Albany Park playground. And we received 5 responses. Town staff interviewed the respondents, and Summit Recreation out of Grand Junction and Palisade was selected by staff and the Post Committee. Post reviewed some potential designs that were done by Summit and selected the rainbow trout design that you have in your packet and we have on the screen here. Staff and Post worked with Summit Recreation to get the plan to the point where Post has recommended entering into a contract with Summit for the installation and procurement. The contract under consideration is for $454,289. Staff also anticipates potentially an additional 30,000 or so on miscellaneous items like irrigation repair once they get done installing. It is planned that Public Works would remove the current equipment in the early spring, and then a target date for having the new equipment and surfacing installed and in place is June 1st. So staff would recommend discussing the contract, and if you're comfortable, you could make a motion to approve the contract. Summit Recreation unfortunately was not able to attend this evening, but if you have questions, we can relay those through staff.
Any questions?
This is a silly question, but I'm trying to picture this in the existing footprint.
Sure.
Is it a different footprint?
No, it's a similar footprint, and here you can see it laid into the site plan. Here is the parking lot currently, and the existing playground is here. There is one little bump out area that goes to the north here. There is a tree that would have to be removed for this bump out, but the town arborist has recommended the ability to remove that tree. It's an elm tree that is subject to potentially the bug.
So as far as tree removal, that was one question I had. There were no other trees or?
No, just.
That's one of the best things about that park is the shade.
Yeah, just the one.
Yeah.
So otherwise, it fits in the current space of the playground.
Got it. Thank you.
I think that image makes it look.
Yeah, it looks really gigantic, and I was like, oh, what's happening?
Looks like we could add more to it, I guess is my question.
Yeah.
Since we have more money, can we get some more things?
The elevation is deceptive. I think the other part here too, which you may have picked up in the presentation or in the packet, is that the brown surfacing there is a fiber wood chip, and then the blue surfacing is a poured in place rubberized, similar to what's at the band shell. And that blue rubberized area it looks random here. It's very specific. It allows for ADA access to different elements of the playground equipment that are designed to be accessible. So that's obviously a feature that does not exist at this time. And it also emulates the river
Looks like a
with
river.
the fish.
Would it be possible, Ryan asked, if we had additional money, would there design elements we had to cut out that we could add back in, or other little play features that might be additions without crowding it or making it outside the ADA accessibility or anything?
No, you'd have to expand the area of the playground to be able to add other features and still meet the ADA accessibility requirements.
No problem.
And we discussed that potential, but you just have to make it bigger.
Yeah, no, it looks awesome.
We'll just get 9-year-olds to go outside.
Any particular 9-year-old?
I can think of, actually, I can think of two.
I just forced my kid outside. That's another story.
Some of that remaining funding may go towards renovating or completely redoing the restrooms in the park. So I wouldn't say that it's not accounted for money.
And then what happened? Do we just trash all the old equipment?
We
or
might
is
be able to
it-
give it away. I mean, that's a possibility. The issue that you come up against is to put it like somewhere else in our town,
Yeah.
it's kind of past its useful life from a safety standpoint. So it could go on a private property, or potentially if another town, smaller town, wanted to take it, they could, but that would be up to them.
We should look into that
Yeah, we
versus the
could.
landfill.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I could put it out on like our listserv for managers and see if there were any takers.
Or could any of it be repurposed for Cliffs Hillside Park? I know it's out of date, but Cliffs Hillside Park is like wood logs.
We've talked about that, and I think one of the things we're learning through this process and the equipment here is that it actually might be more cost effective to just buy one more piece of equipment through this project.
And
or
retrofit.
during this and put it at Cliffs Hillside that meets all the SRSA requirements.
Not a problem.
But we thought about it, cause that would be a really a feel-good move, but.
Is there a
I think-
reason,
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
go ahead.
I don't know if we bought that equipment. I think we adopted it. Somebody gave it to the town
Yes.
as a gift, right?
Martina
That's what I
Navratilova
thought,
gifted it to
yeah.
us.
Wait, Cliffs?
No, is that from, no, what we're replacing, right?
No, Cliffs.
No,
Oh,
the-
came
Cliffs is
from-
from
in
Martina.
Cliffs.
Okay.
Why don't we have a sign dedicated?
Isn't that fun?
That's
Yeah.
awesome.
That's crazy.
That sounds ridiculous.
No, I was just gonna ask if there was, why the entrance is on the side and whether there could be an entrance directly from the parking lot. I'm sure there's reasoning behind that, but it's just.
There's, you'll still have the ability to walk from the parking lot directly into the playground. There's just a slight curb that goes around it, so,
But I mean for ADA,
for ADA, they have it set up here to come in from this side because that's where the path is. We could see if they can extend the pour in place to the walk here and see if that would work. Town staff can work with them on that.
it just might be nice for somebody to,
It's a good catch.
Yeah, or put it in between the two round, like the round thing and the little kid playhouse. Just so it butts right against the curb.
Right here?
Yeah, right there.
And for strollers too, I mean, you can think of a lot of use cases of people coming in straight from the parking lot as well.
Mhm.
Yeah, that's a good point. We'll work on that.
What's the lifespan on this stuff now, out of curiosity? Like, for being serviceable and safe and all that stuff?
They generally have indicated it's about a 20-year lifespan, but they have a 10-year warranty on most parts of it.
Okay. Any other questions, comments, or a motion?
I would encourage one more rocking fish. But that's enough. That looks like there's room at least next to it. but
Yeah, that's not
I'm
bad.
no designer.
We'll ask.
Please.
What's the radius of a rocking fish?
Apparently pretty big. I mean, if you look at the circle around it.
Mayor, I move that the town council adopt resolution number 48, series of 2023.
Second.
Okay, is it moved and seconded? All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any nays? I doubt it. All right, passed.
Thank you.
Thanks, James. All right, next item is 7D, resolution number 49, series of 2023. Resolution of the Town Council of Basalt, Colorado, approving a contract for Willets Lane connectivity and town wayfinding plan. Michelle?
All right, so, it's so nice when they're working. Let's see, so the town council, the Willets Lane connectivity and town wayfinding plan is based on multiple aspects of the town's goals, including the Basalt Climate Action Plan, which has aggressive goals to reduce our carbon emissions through many actions, including engagement and outreach with the community, promoting and providing multimodal transit. Additionally, the 2020 Basalt Master Plan themes of connectivity and mobility between the nodes of Basalt, alternative transportation methods, and improved trail connections and wayfinding are identified as community priorities. The Willets Lane Community Connectivity and Town Wayfinding Plan is intended to create action on these identified priorities. The Parks, Open Space, and Trails Commission directed staff to pursue this plan with consideration of trail connection improvements, remedy user conflicts along Willets Lane trails, including improvements to DeRocks Park, and elevate the safety of all users. The Green Team directed staff to pursue this plan in respect to starting a national bike-friendly community certification to improve safety for everyone there. And the Basalt Public Arts Commission identified the plan as an opportunity to expand our art installations and connect the east and west nodes of Basalt visually. A request for proposals was advertised with proposals due November 13th. 4 proposals were submitted by the due date. The selection committee reviewed and scored the proposals, and unanimously and strongly scoring Alta Design and Planning as the winning proposal. And tonight, Chloe Ward has patiently sat until this last item to be the face of Alta here tonight. And staff recommends approving this resolution so we can move forward.
All
Happy
right.
to take your questions.
Does Chloe have anything to add?
I'm just happy to, yeah, I can come up, talk to the microphone. Good evening, everyone. I'm Chloe Ward. I am an engineer with Alta Planning and Design. I live and work remotely down in Glenwood Springs. I've been in the valley for almost 5 years now. And Alta focuses primarily on active and multimodal transportation projects. We were really excited to put in for the opportunity to work on this project in Basalt, and work on not only improving the connectivity, but also the wayfinding piece is something that Alta does a lot of really great work into. So yeah, I'm happy to answer any questions if you all have any, or Michelle, if you wanted me to speak to anything.
That's it for now. There'll be a lot coming from us in the future.
Questions? Yeah, go.
Does this include the signs, or is this just the planning?
This is just the planning. So locating the signs, the size, the design, construction of any improvements that come out of the plan will be at a future date with a future budget. And that's actually one of the requests of Alta through this plan, is to help us phase out any improvements that are per our financial abilities. So we're not looking at a giant project that we need to do all at once. We can decide to do plans first or certain aspects and make best decisions that way.
What do the big milestone deliverables look like in the kind of in the roadmap? I know there's a lot of little ones along the way, but like kind of just for, can you illustrate that?
Do you want to speak to that, or do you want me to take it?
Yeah, I think, some of the things that we're looking for is there's going to be a ton of community outreach along this area. We have so many different users between the residents in the area, the industrial design district and their users of DeRox Park, whether it be the commercial rafting guides or local uses, biking uses and all of those things. We have the other neighborhoods towards the other end. So there'll be a lot of input and surveys that are built into the program to get input and kind of measure what the priorities are from those users, and then making that connection to how we get across town. The other deliverable along this line is figuring out what design elements are required through the bike-friendly certification program and how those will be integrated into any design elements for this plan. So lots of activities that are running parallel schedules, but they're interconnected.
Sure. There's probably some interconnectedness eventually with the logo and the brand, right?
Absolutely. Yep.
So, would one of those things be that sort of raft pull-out area that Bill's been talking about, that we can finally, so would that be in this plan, or would that just highlight that we have to address that separately?
That's in this plan. Yeah, that raft pullout is known as DeRox Park, and it's a known literal pinch point in the area for sure.
I just lost the slide. And timeline, basically through next year is what we're looking at. Okay. 2 public outreaches, one. I don't have any further questions. Anybody else have any questions or comments? Or a motion?
Mayor, I move the town council adopt resolution number 49, series of 2023.
Second.
Okay, moved and seconded. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay. Well, thank you both.
Thank you.
Thanks for your patience.
Yeah. All right, well, that brings us to the end of the agenda, so we're adjourned.
And
Sorry.
if I may, I just wanted to mention that at the back that communication, so Dieter, David, and Glenn, and Jenny and I sat down. You all reviewed the applications for the discretionary giving and made those choices, and we put it in here for your information. So just to take a look at that.
Oh, yeah, thanks for including that.
The,
Otherwise,
Anything new and interesting that was,
Happy holiday stuff.
a lot of stuff.
Yeah, there was,
but was there somebody new, like, totally?
was there, what,
I
there
don't know,
was.
just curious.
Let's see. I'm scanning really fast. Actually, no.
We're adjourned.
Everybody was a repeat. Yeah, we're adjourned.
We're just
Sorry.
chit-chatting.
Oh, the
Yeah, but how do we know